When you play rhythm on electric guitar, sometimes the good old open chords are exactly what's needed. But often, you'll have another guitar already playing those chords. Like in our band, we often have Ryan playing acoustic guitar and he's doing open chords a lot of the time. So why would I do exactly the same thing? Here are 5 ways that you can improve your rhythm guitar playing on electric guitar. And first, let's just hear what those concepts sound like. The first thing to think about is to change your rhythm. Do something rhythmically different than the other guitar player. The important thing about that is you have to make sure that you still are keeping with the groove, the general feel of the song. You can't just start playing a reggae beat on a Metallica song. It doesn't make sense, right? So we've got to feel where the rhythm is, where the groove is, and fit something that is a little different. A great way to do that is simply by starting with a lot of open space. For a lot of songs, you don't want to start really loud because then you don't have the ability to get louder for a chorus, which is a very great way of making a chorus sound more exciting. So leaving open space at the beginning of the song is a great option. One thing you could do is just not play at all, right? You could just not play, say, the first half of the first verse, or even the whole first verse. If there's someone already playing those chords, you don't need to play them. The chords are there already, or you could do something like this. You could just do basic holds. I'm just hitting them each time. And then I'm noticing that last bar there is a certain groove, right? It's a little stronger, and there's a chord change that comes faster. So I might hit those in the same way as the acoustic guitar or in a similar way because that moment is just calling for it. And you'll notice I could play the same shapes as the acoustic guitar, but just playing them rhythmically different makes it interesting. So it could still just be this B minor slash A, this G, and then, like we said, the rhythm on the last 2 chords. And one thing to notice about the groove of this particular jam track that I've created, by the way, the jam tracks and the tabs for all these are going to be on our Patreon. But one thing to notice is that some of these chords are anticipated. So just when I said that we have to follow the groove, even if we're going to change the rhythm, we have to hear the groove, and we'll notice that that groove includes anticipation on some of the chords. If we don't hit that anticipation, it's not going to sound right. We're going to sound jarring, or we're going to sound in conflict with the other guitar. So for example, if I just count in that first part, you'll hear that the second chord comes early. It comes on the end of 4. Right? So if I play from the first chord, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's there. We would not want to hit the second chord on beat 1 if everyone else is hitting the second chord on the end of 1 anticipation. It's just not going to sound good. So that's what I mean by, even though we're changing our rhythm, we want to make sure that the groove is clear and that we fit with that groove. And speaking about changing the rhythm guitar is not only about strumming. We can also arpeggiate chords or play little licks or walks between chords to make it sound more interesting. It depends on how busy we want the song to sound at that moment in the song. So, like we said, we might not want to do this right at the top, unless it's an intro without a singer, but we don't want to get too much in the way of the singer because then the singer is going to be giving us some dirty looks because they're the star, of course. So if we arpeggiated that first chord, I don't think I did that in the demo, but it's still worth mentioning. We can still just hold that chord, but we play the notes in succession. And then maybe the second chord is strummed. So now we have a lot of variety in texture, if you will, in those chords. We could do that for each of them, or let's say we walk to one of the chords. So we'd have 2, 3. That's kind of cool. That works well, and it's a pretty simple technique, really, right? Just arpeggiating the chord. I didn't even have to think of any kind of fancy chord shape, or just a walk from a note in the scale to the root of the chord. That's an incredibly common walk to G. So I know the G is coming. I gotta think in advance a little bit, and I just think of a note in the scale, E, there, and I'm just walking from the scale to the root of that chord. There it is, there's G. And then again, I might want to keep with the groove of the song for the last 2 chords. For that, because I want to fit with that exciting moment and keep that groove going. But let's talk about some fancier chords, because we want to be able to play chords not always down here. And yes, like we said, we could just play the bar chord versions. And those are fine too, but we don't want to be limited. We want to be able to see how chords are connected with triads, which is a small chord, right? And with the scale shapes, so that we can move very smoothly from one chord to another and play riffs or licks in between. So just as an example, let's take those last 2 chords and put them somewhere else. It's a D and an A, right? There's a great place to play a D and an A up here on the fretboard that I do this all the time. You can kind of just memorize where these are, but in principle, we want to understand the triads so that we can use them not just for D and A, but we could use them for any chords. So the D that I play all the time, it looks like this. I did play that in the demo there. It comes from just a standard D bar chord. We can see the 3 notes right there are just part of that bar chord. And all I've done is I've just shrunk it down. I just used the smaller piece. Especially if we are the other guitar playing rhythm, we don't need to have large chords all the time. In fact, sometimes it sounds very cool to have a smaller chord. Now, there's some extra magic with this one, which we'll see in a minute, is that 2 things. 1, it's going to connect to the A really easily. But 2, we're going to use an open string to make these sound bigger and richer. So the A that I love to use, my God, I use this A so much. And where does it come from? Again, we want to remember the principles of how we can find these things whenever we need them, not just if it's A. In this case, it is A. It comes from, again, just a big bar chord. It's just a triad. It's root, 3rd, 5th. And it's inside that big bar chord. If you can kind of picture where those notes are, it looks different because we're using different fingers, but it's there. Now here's what I especially love about these 2 chords, this D and this A and specifically, and that is that we could include the open A string. Certainly we can include that on the A chord. And that sounds kind of cool because now we have this open A and we have this triad on top of it. And it's actually really easy to grab. I love this one because it sounds good and it's easy to grab. But now let's talk about that D. We could also include that open A string on that D chord. Why would that be? Well, that takes a little bit of musical math, but if we remember that a D chord is D, F sharp, A, in other words, that a D chord has an A in it already, so we could certainly have that. And now we have this D with A in the bass. That would be called D/A. And we have this A with A in the bass, which is just A. So what do we have so far? We've got change the rhythm, which usually means leaving a lot of open space because someone else is already playing the chords. And we've got add arpeggios or walks between the chords. And we can sometimes just decide to play the chords in a different place. And the next important thing to remember as a rhythm guitar player is we need to use dynamics. We need to get loud or soft at different parts in the songs. And a great place to do that is right before the chorus. We want to crescendo. We want to ramp up the volume or the amount that we're playing so that it sounds more exciting and we're kind of launching into that part of the song. So often that's just strumming more or just louder. We could use those chords that we have at the end of that section there, and we could hit them louder and we strum more. So we might have the B minor, the walk, but now you'll notice that I hit those last two chords louder and I strummed a lot more to create a lot more interest, a lot more excitement going into that chorus. Now don't forget, as we build volume going into the chorus, we want to remember that once the chorus is over, we've got to bring that volume back down. We've got to bring the dynamics back down. Otherwise, the whole song starts to sound kind of the same. So let's talk about that chorus. The final step that we could do is start to connect some of these concepts, especially connect them to the scale shape. And so what I'm doing here is I'm thinking about the chords. Maybe I'm thinking about them in a different place. The first chord we know is a B minor. So let's start up on this B minor bar chord, but if I wanted to play a very small riff or hammer on here, I need to know what is the scale shape there. And we can just memorize that whenever we have that standard bar chord shape there, that minor shape, that the minor pentatonic related to it is easy shape 1. We can see that the chord actually kind of looks like the scale shape. They fit over top one another, and that makes it a lot easier to memorize that they belong together. So what I did in the demo there is I just did kind of a hammer on. I actually did 2 notes at once. I did the A and the D strings. I hammered both of them, but it could have been just one. It could have been that one or that one. It doesn't matter. It could have been any of these kind of licks around here. And I did that on beat 1 because I think in the chorus, to have more excitement, we can be a little busier with our playing. So I did something like this. I have more strums and I have that hammer on. Now we have that second chord to deal with. We have to do a B minor / A. Now what I did was I looked down at the fretboard and I thought, okay, well, a B minor 7 would be like that standard B minor chord, but without the pinky, right? I don't have to play the /A because someone else is going to play that. We have a guitar in this already who's playing it, and we have a bass that's already playing it. So I don't have to play that A, but I could. And that A is really just making it a B minor 7. Because if you count it up, B, C, D, you get to A, and you'd see that a B minor 7 is just a B minor with an A. So we look at that B minor 7 shape, and we see these 3 notes. That's 7, 7, 7 on the D, G, B strings. Wait a second, we're getting deja vu, right? Didn't we say that that was a D triad? That's really interesting because what happens with some of these chords is that they share a lot of the same notes. And in fact, a D major chord is very similar to a B minor, especially a B minor 7 chord. They share some of the same notes. And so that's why, in some cases, they end up being the exact same thing. And we can literally just use this for that B minor / A. Guess what? That lowest note there is an A as well. And guess what? We could even include that open A string, which would make it B minor 7 / A. Crazy, it's the same thing. We used it as D, but now we're using it as B minor 7 / A. Amazing. Also, it's really handy because it's right there. And now because it's a chorus, we can be a little busier. So we could throw in another one of those hammer-on. I just did single notes that time. That's a classic hammer-on lick. That's in billions of songs. Again, it's just B minor pentatonic easy shape. Now, what's the next chord? It's a G chord. So sure, I could just go down and grab my easiest G chord or G bar chord that I find. But there's a closer one. And when we really get used to using these kinds of chord connections and scale connections, we can play a chord sequence without really moving very far on the fretboard, which makes us look real clever, but also it can sound really good because one chord sort of just falls into the next. And this next one is one of my favorites. It was Keith Richards' favorite. In fact, I nicknamed this one the Keith Richards because he did it all the time. He didn't invent it, but he did it a lot. And it sounds like this. So what is that chord? That's the G chord right there. But how did I know it's a G chord? It's one thing to just memorize this. Oh, Blue played this thing and I memorized it. Yeah, that'd be cool. But really, it's better to memorize the principle. Is how do we find these things when we need them? Because we could play this as a G chord or an F chord or an E chord, whenever we need those chords, right? Now, there's a couple ways you could memorize how to find this chord. I'm finding it because I know that note on the B string at the 8th fret is a G note. And so I know that's the root of that chord, and I've just memorized that chord shape when the root is there. Now, I know a lot of my students don't necessarily know the notes on the B string very quick, but I insist that they all know the notes on the low E and the A string really quick. So you can use a note there on one of those strings as a landmark. Even if we're not playing that note, there's a G at the 10th fret of the A string. And you could just imagine, you could look down and say, oh, there's a G there, and so therefore over here, there's the Keith Richards. And now we're at the last two chords, but we already know the last two chords. We could just do these again. They're already good ones, right? We had this as D. We also had it as B minor 7, but we have it as D. And we have this as A. So put all that together, and we've got... Or what if we wanted to change it for the last time around? Because this pretend song that I've made, the chorus runs through those chords twice. So maybe the second time we want to change those last two chords. Instead of playing D, A here, well, there's an A, but let's just move that A up. It becomes A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, right? There's a D there. That's a D triad. And so I could start there. Instead of starting on that one, I could start that one. And again, principles, right? Remember, how are we going to remember forevermore that this triad is a D triad? It's easy. Just remember that this D triad comes from this big D bar chord. It's right inside there. It's kind of hard to envision that inside because we use different fingers and it's sort of hidden in there. But it's there. Those notes are in that bar chord. And now I guess I could just take that D and move it all the way down to the A we had. That wouldn't be too bad. But there's an A closer by. When we memorize these chord connections, we can see D to A is going to be like that. And guess what? That A is the Keith Richards version of the G we did before. That's the same shape. And it's just going to sound cool because they're going to flow really nicely. It's just a very small movement for two very different chords. And so if we did that at the end, it would sound like this. And so to get good at that, we have to be able to find those triad shapes on the fretboard quickly. And this video is a great next step for doing that. Also, don't forget, we are going to analyze this whole thing in much greater detail on our Patreon. Plus, we're going to have these tabs and that jam track that we used in this video. So for all you Patreon members, thanks for being a member, and I'll see you over there.